Thank you for joining us for The Drive Back, the movie podcast where we imitate our favorite thing to do after a movie, which is to talk about it on the ride home. My name is Garrett, and of course I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Adrian.
Great Scott!
And today, with that hint, we're going to be doing another franchise fever episode, where we look at an entire series or franchise, review each of the movies within, and then rank them tier style from most good to least good. Today, we're going to be taking a look at probably one of my top 10 favorite franchises of all time, which is Back to the Future, and it's the first time that Adrian's seen it. So this is going to be a very special episode coming up on The Drive Back. So, Back to the Future is the franchise we're going to be looking at today. And, Adrian, this is your first time watching the Back to the Future movies.
Yeah, 100%. Very interesting. This is, again, I feel like this is with so many movies, but I'd heard so much about them that it was kind of just one of those things where I was like, I don't know, I don't really need to see it. Like, I get the premise. I know all the catchphrases. Like, I get the gimmicks and all that. But it was well worth a watch. There was a lot in there that isn't talked about when people talk about this movie that kind of makes the movie and gives it that charm. So I really enjoyed watching all three of them. Just again, it being the first time and watching them back to back, I think made quite a big difference because there wasn't any loss of information, especially when the plot gets a little convoluted. I was able to kind of just like streamline, cookie cutter it all the way through.
Exactly, yes. And to structure this episode today, we're going to do something a little bit different because this is a franchise that I have watched at least 3 of these movies once a year. I know a lot about them. Yes, I was pretty much raised on these movies. So I'm going to let Adrian take the lead on this one a little bit and talk about more his firsthand experience and what he's seen it on the first try going around. So...
Sure. Should I talk about the first movie in particular?
Let me go ahead and introduce it. The first film in the franchise is Back to the Future, surprisingly. It was directed by Robert Zemeckis, released in 1985, and stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, and Leah Thompson. Marty McFly, a 17-year-old high school student, is accidentally sent 30 years into the past by his close friend and the eccentric scientist known as Doc Brown. It was nominated for 3 Oscars, including Best Original Screenplay, Best Sound, and Best Original Song, and 1 for Best Sound Effects Editing. So, first movie in the trilogy, what are your general thoughts?
General thoughts, without comparing it to the other 2, was that this movie is really, really good. I mean, of course, it's definitely a little dated, with a couple of the things in there, but overall it's very charming. It definitely has its own aesthetic and its own vibe to it. And you figure it out immediately. Without getting into spoilers, there's like a scene in the very beginning that kind of sets the tone for the whole movie, which is serious but playful, where the stakes are very, very high, but there's also those like inside jokes that happen along the way. So yeah, I found the first one very, very enjoyable all the way throughout.
Gotcha, yeah. And, I mean, it's kind of redundant because this is one of my favorite franchises, but I think this film is, while it's not a masterpiece, I would say it's very close. This movie is so tightly done. The performances are just exceptional. They're remembered to this day. And, everyone is at least aware of, how the time travel works in this universe, right? You affect the past and it affects the present.
Yeah.
Not really spoiling anything there.
It's interesting though because it's maybe this is just how the movie was done because obviously you need to, but it was very selective in what decisions affected the future. Like it wasn't like as deep as the butterfly effect where if you are slightly late to the event, the whole future is different.
Yeah.
It was more like major bullet points in history needed to remain the same. Those little details could definitely change.
Yeah, and which, I mean, we've been spoiled by time travel being handled or being explained better in Endgame. and how it would actually work, because it's the same. It's your continuing timeline. It's very. I don't want to take the time explaining it here, but it's played up for comedic effect and for tension in this movie, and it works surprisingly well. So let's go ahead and talk some details, though. Some spoilers. Want to pick your brain on a couple of things.
Sure.
So spoiler warning for a movie that's almost 40 years old at this point. Actually, I think it's coming up on 40 years old. So if you haven't seen it, this is one I think we both say go watch. Like, it's just...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it being my first time. Yeah, if you're thinking about it and you're like, oh, there's just a lot of movies to watch or whatever, at least watch the first one. It's well worth it.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and dive in. So what are some spoiler thoughts? Like, what are some of your favorite moments in the movie? Let's start with there.
Yeah, well, the scene that I really like that kind of set the tone for the movie... actually, and to be honest, I didn't like it when it happened, but after watching the whole movie, it kind of became part of the bigger picture. And it was at the very beginning when Marty plays the guitar on that massive amplifier, and it like launches him back through the wall. It's the opening scene of the movie. At first, I was like, oh, that's really dated type of comedy. Like, I don't know. But then it totally fit the entire film. Like, it made so much sense that that's how they started it. And it all fell into place. So that, I think, was a really key scene, at least for me, or at least a decision point for me. But I really liked the time travel stuff. I'm a big sci-fi guy, so I found it just really interesting. And I found myself really trying to dissect the whole, like, well, we'll send you back to the exact minute, so then it was like, so then that person would never be gone. And then the car just keeps going. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that I loved digging my brain into. It was really, really fun.
Yeah, awesome. And so so obviously the first scene with Marty is that your favorite moment in the movie?
No, that was just one of the key scenes. My favorite moment in the movie, man, that's tough. I think it would have to be the scene right towards the end when he needs to tell Doc that he's going to die on this date. And so he's supposed to go back to the future, but then he goes back to the past 10 minutes before again to try to catch Doc for the second time to give him the note. I think that was really, really cool because it just got more and more into that time loop.
Yeah.
And then, I loved the whole idea of the reveal was a really big scene where he had the chest plate underneath because he had taped together the note.
Yeah.
And he goes, I thought you were supposed to mess around. And then basically Doc said, screw it. Like we've messed with so much stuff. And to me, that was such a perfect line because the whole movie, like I kind of said earlier, it took itself, it's very serious plot line. Like there are very high consequences for what's going on. But I loved that, like, they mess around so much in the movie with it that at the end it's just like, who cares? Like, let's just have the happy ending.
And some of those consequences are further explored in the second one, which we'll talk about momentarily. But there's a specific moment that I wanted to point out because it's been brought up a lot when it comes to great moments in film, suspense or tension. And it's the scene close to where you were saying where they have to get the lightning to strike at the right moment on the clock tower, send the lightning down, and send the car back to the past, or excuse me, to the future. And the tension and the events that happen, like, Doc is up there, he can't get it to plug in. He finally gets it to plug in, sees it gets unplugged down at the bottom. He's got to get down there. The tension is, there's I think Cinefix did an art of the scene on it that is absolutely incredible, because they time out when things happen. But all this time you're like, man, Doc Brown really needs to get his stuff together. Like, he's got to
figure it out, yeah.
But what's funny is that if he did it on time, like the car still wouldn't start. So, like, that's another layer of tension. And even if it was perfectly timed, he wouldn't have gone back. So it's a very interesting moment. Like, it's not, like, tense. It's not like one of the best moments of tension in film, I think, which is in Sicario on the border scene. It's more like, it's going to be okay, but it's still, like, super exciting. And that's
because it's almost like dominoes, where everything needs to fall into place at the exact second that it does, and then, in order for it all to work.
But none of it's lining up, and you're like, uh-oh, So, like,
but then as it all pieces together, like, one by one, you're like, okay, that's done. Oh, now this needs to be done, and then it all leads you up to the exact moment when it happens. Exactly. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, very cool scene.
Also, I mean, the famous scene with the prom dance, and he's playing the guitar up on the stage, and starts looking at the picture and sees that he's still disappearing.
I loved the hand scene, the technology that they used, which was just like the two plates in front of each other, and you could see through. That was really good. And I also love. I mean, again, I had heard about this scene, but I loved the whole like, oh, I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet, but your kids are gonna love it.
The thing's become a meme.
Yeah,
it's great. The whole movie is just so much fun all around, and it creates characters that you genuinely just care about.
Yeah, I think it. I don't even know if you could make the movie again. One, I don't think it should, but I'm thinking there's a lot of like borderline incestual stuff with his mom, and it given it's different, like it's not a direct. She is no longer his mom in the movie technically.
At that point,
yeah, exactly, but it still has some very weird moments.
But again, that's what creates the. I don't want to say exciting. It's the exciting tension. It's not like
sure.
you know it's going to go wrong, but like it creates more of that tension. Like, yo, you better fix this, or your family's going to disappear.
Yeah.
So, I think while it is weird, it does add that other layer of like this has to go right to go well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so favorite moments out of the way. Is there anything that you would critique with this movie? Anything off the top of your head that you think maybe could have been done better, or anything like that?
No, I have more critiques for the following two, more so one than the other. But this one I just thought was a pretty cohesive movie. I think it was a massive undertaking figuring out the timelines and everything. And I think it was really, really well done. I would agree that it is borderline a masterpiece, and deserves to be viewed by anybody looking to watch a really, really good classic film.
And it's one of those ones that's like, it's considered one of the, at least in my film circles, one of the better films of all time. And it's one that if you're going on this film journey and learning more about film and trying to enjoy it more and critique it more and really understand what makes a film good, it's one of those perfect movies that you can just step into doing that with.
Yeah, 100%. And it definitely holds up. I said earlier that it was dated, and I mean that in like some of the things that they say or how they talk to people. But the movie itself it's almost preserved perfectly. Like it holds up in its own entirety so well in this day and age that it really feels like a vacation getting to watch it. Like you get immersed in this whole world, and it's really magical.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where saying dated isn't a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not like how Robots felt kind of out of date. This one, it's like it's the 80s and they're going back to the 50s. Something is going to feel dated in there.
Yeah.
So, but anything else you want to talk about with Back to the Future? Anything specifically?
Now, I'll use this as a segue into the second movie, but I thought the ending scene where they are forced to take, what is his girlfriend's name? Marty's girlfriend. What is her name?
I forget, honestly.
But they have to. Doc comes back from the future and says, like, "You guys got to go now." And they go. He goes, "You guys are fine. It's what your kids do." I thought that was a really good cliffhanger, especially with them not knowing that there was going to be a second or third one.
Yeah.
Because that was a big commit on their part.
Yeah. I mean, even then, it's a good cliffhanger, and it shows off some cool visual effects at the end. But
those don't hold up as good. But because of the movie, it's better that they don't. It almost adds to that, like, oh, this is like a classic good movie. Like, this is so fun. So I think it was all the better for it.
Absolutely. But before we move on to the second one, let's go ahead and drop some scores. Adrian, what did you think Back to the Future deserved for a score?
I gave this movie a 96.
All right.
Yeah, I think this movie is really, really good. This was my first time watching it, so I probably am viewing it through rose-colored glasses because I got excited to watch them once I realized I hadn't seen them. So I was definitely like looking forward to it. I don't see myself dropping my score. I also don't see myself necessarily watching it again soon. I don't think I'm a yearly watcher. Like you said, you were of these movies, but this is really, really good. And if you're going to watch if you're thinking about watching any of them and you're worried that 3's too many, at least watch the first one, because it dips your toes in this world that you just want to know more about, and it's very fun.
Yeah, it creates this really interesting kind of reality, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Where these things are possible. So,
Yeah.
definitely a lot of fun. We're actually really close. I gave it a 97.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, we're both in the same mindset. I think we both agree that this is one of those ones that, if you haven't seen it, what are you doing?
Well,
it's probably.
I didn't see it until. Yeah, I did.
Maybe that was a subtle dig at you.
Yeah.
But yeah, this movie's so much fun. It's so full of heart. It's not like, I don't want to say it's mean-spirited in any way. It's just a lot of fun. And so,
yeah.
Let's go ahead and move on, though, to the second film in the franchise, which is Back to the Future Part 2. It was released in 1989, so 4 years after the first movie. It was again directed by Robert Zemeckis and stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, and Leah Thompson. After visiting 2015, Marty McFly must repeat his visit to 1955 to prevent disastrous changes to 1985. All without interfering with the first trip he made. It was nominated for 1 Oscar for Best Visual Effects.
Interesting.
So this was the follow-up that was greenlit as soon as Back to the Future became a success. It came out 4 years later, which is surprising because the actors look pretty much the same. I want to know how much they actually shot before.
Well, I heard from someone else that 2 and 3 were shot simultaneously.
Yes.
So they greenlit both films and they filmed them at the same time, which even crazier than just filming one movie right after the other. But I will 100% agree with you that it creates this cohesiveness that, like, there is no aging. Like, it's not like the Harry Potter series where every movie the kids look super different.
Yeah.
All the characters look like they stopped filming yesterday and then started filming the next day.
Yeah.
Which is incredible, yeah.
So, but let's go ahead. Some general thoughts about Back to the Future Part 2.
Yeah, I liked this one the second best, I think. It's close. But I thought it was super interesting. I loved seeing the same scenes from the first film from a slightly different perspective, like from hiding behind a wall or trying not to get caught, or thinking back to the first one and realizing that all this stuff is happening in the background. We just didn't see it because technically it was so complicated, but technically, like, Marty and Doc were there during the first movie. We just couldn't see them because they were hiding.
Yeah.
And I think it was when you said it only got nominated for 1, I thought it would have gotten nominated for Best Original Story, because I think they did a really good job of tying it all together and really making you think about it. Like, oh, could this have happened oh yeah, that's the same thing, and all that stuff.
Yeah, and it really lends itself to the idea that these 3 movies as a whole are inseparable. They all are one cohesive story, which is huge props. That it all works, for the most part, and creates a solid, consistent story. But let's stick, obviously, to number 2. I think this movie is a lot of fun. I definitely think that, unfortunately, it's 2021 and nothing that was in the movie has happened.
2015 was not as cool as the movie makes it out to be.
Look where we are now. It sucks. But I think the movie still is a lot of fun. I think the one thing that it does better than the original movie is that it plays with the consequences more, right? We see
totally
the consequences of choices that can affect both the past and the present and create splinter timelines. It's very, very well done in that regard. However, I don't think it's as good as the first one. I think I'm with you there in terms of it being second best. I'm pretty sure we both say it goes number 1, number 2, number 3 at this point.
Yeah, my 2 and 3 though, I kind of went back and forth. There was a lot that I liked from both of them, and there's a couple stuff I didn't like from each of them, and some just outweighed the other. But I would agree in total that it goes 1, 2, and 3 in order of release.
So skipping over the entire tiering part of the video and the episode, 1, 2, 3. That's how they go. But so let's go ahead and dive into some spoiler discussion for Back to the Future Part 2. Again, if you have not seen it, make sure you watch it. You can pause here. You won't offend us. Go watch it.
I'll be offended.
Well, apparently Adrian will be offended. I won't. So, but let's go ahead and spoiler talk. Starting off again, what was your favorite moment of the movie?
My favorite moment of the movie, I mean, it's kind of just the whole thing where Marty was trying to avoid other Marty, like during the whole prom scene. I thought that was super fascinating, trying to make sure all this stuff happens and you don't change that timeline while still trying to accomplish what you're trying to do now. I thought that was super interesting. And then I also did really love the future part of it. I thought that was really, really fun. I think it didn't happen, obviously, that whole future, but I think they did such a good job of keeping it like it felt realistic. Besides the flying cars, even that though felt really grounded. Like nothing looked super crazy out of the box. Like there weren't any weird vehicles. All cars still looked like cars. There wasn't anything like super abnormal. One thing that I did not, or maybe I did like, I don't know, but I thought it was really funny is that it seems like the cliffhanger from the first movie really was like, oh, now we got to wrap Marty's girlfriend into it. And then it seems like they wrote the script for the second one and went, we don't want her in it at all. Because then they start the movie and she's all scared. So they knock her out, and then Doc goes, she'll wake up back in the present. She'll never know what happened. And that's her whole part in this movie is getting knocked out. They were like, we don't want her.
And then there's some tension in Marty, in their house when she's awake and she runs into her future self.
Yeah, when she comes back. Yeah, I guess. But it seemed like at the end of the first movie, I felt like, oh my gosh, now they're like 3 people doing it. And then they pretty much just were like, no, we didn't want to do that, but she'll be here in a little bit, but we'll focus on the other 2. Not necessarily a bad thing, just something really interesting that I noticed. But yeah, I think my favorite scene was just the overlapping scenes from the first one shown from a different perspective with a different goal. I thought that was incredible.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Definitely all the stuff taking place in 1955 is incredibly well done, showing it from a different point of view. I also really like the hoverboard chase sequence around the city square, which is a lot of fun and very well done. It's exactly what they did with the skateboard in the first one. So
they even call it out where Biff, I think, goes like, well, this is awfully familiar or something like that.
Just those little like nods they're so great.
But I loved the practical effects with that hoverboard. At least in this movie, most of them were very practically done using angles. You could tell a lot of it with the floating DeLorean too. Like part of it would be hidden behind a building so that you couldn't see like the forklift or whatever. But it worked so well. Like it's just enough to suspend your disbelief that it just feels like, okay, yeah, like you know that what's happening, but it feels good. And the whole, like, when the hoverboard's over the water, it just looks good, even though, like, there's like a little glass pillar and stuff there. They did such a good job practically doing it that it all feels good. Nothing feels like way out of the way, even when he's being thrown into a turn on the car and the hoverboard like flies up and he goes up. It's just very, very fun.
Yeah, and that's the entire, I think, the premise of this movie. The whole thing is fun. Even kind of the darker parts that take place in the Splinter reality are still fun. It never feels like it's overbearing, like, oh, he really made a bad decision. Whoops.
Yeah.
Which is kind of nice. There is one thing I wanted to highlight, though, and I want to see if you caught it. Because I never even noticed, and I've seen this movie a lot. I haven't noticed until today when I was talking with a coworker. The actor who played Marty's father in the first movie, Crispin Freeman.
Yeah.
Crispin Glover.
Okay.
He would not come back for the sequel. And they actually recast his father with someone who looks just like him because they couldn't even use his likeness. And this is actually this was the movie that led to a huge lawsuit in Hollywood about using likenesses and actors getting paid for it. Because I think they actually used his likeness and did not pay him for it.
Whoa. So it's a different actor?
Yeah, which is also why you don't see him in number 3.
Wow.
It's really weird. Yeah.
Yeah, very.
So, but I didn't even catch that. So
No,
it's
I
really well
didn't.
done, at least. So,
Yeah.
but and obviously this movie is not as good as the first one for, I would say, a couple different reasons. But what would you critique with this movie? Maybe what doesn't make it live up to the first in any way? Like what do you say?
I think the thing that really, I don't want to say bogged down this movie, but definitely to me took it back a notch was the plot felt very similar. Like to me, it felt like they had the plot from the first film, and it's kind of the same for all three movies. Is the goal pretty much of the movie is to change a photograph or a headline or a picture. Like that is the overall goal of the film, and I think that this being the second one, yeah, they added more fluff to it, but it was the same story, and it felt a little tired at times seeing the same shots over and over again. Because some of the stuff was really cool when it was shown from a different perspective, but then they also just reused a lot of footage for the actual shots to show like this is where we are. So to me, that felt a little bit like a cop out. Like, okay, I wish I could have seen more. But that's not a very big negative because it's part of that larger narrative that the second one has. I more have positives for the second one than I do negatives.
Okay.
So yeah, I thought it was really enjoyable.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like my only real complaint with this movie is that it can get a little. Not convoluted, but like they add a lot with like the Splinter timeline and going back to 55 and
A
2015.
lot of fluff, yeah.
There's a lot going on, and it can be a little too much for a first-time viewer. So that's kind of why I think it kind of loses some points for me.
I do think they nailed a lot of the 2015 technology, just like when he walks into the Texaco restaurant and like a bunch of screens are there, like trying to get him to order and yelling at each other. That's totally our world right now. It's just screens everywhere. I mean, it was, very, very crazy.
Yeah, there are some things they get right. Some of the technology in the house, like the larger screens and video chatting and all that have all come true. Who thought we'd be using it to work over the last year?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of fun. And that's the big thing with this movie. Whereas the first movie is smart and fun, this movie is just a lot of fun. Not that it's not smart in any way, but the fun dominates over the smart in this movie.
Yeah, I think this movie that
suspend disbelief.
I think this movie, the smarts rest on the laurels of the first film.
Yeah.
And that's, I think it picks up the fun, but I completely agree with you. And I think that's part of my negative is that it just seems to ride the wave of the first one. And it doesn't really do anything like shocking. It's all pretty, I don't want to say predictable because it does jump around a lot, but it feels safe. It feels like they did the first one and then they said like, okay, that model worked really well. Let's just like kind of do that again over here.
Yeah, but there is twists on it. Like it's not exactly the same.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They add fluff and they add a lot more different timelines. Like it gets more complicated, but it feels at its core this very, very similar to the first. Yeah. And that's probably where my negative, that one little negative comes across.
Absolutely. Yeah. But let's go ahead. Anything else you'd like to talk about for the second movie?
No, I think there was a lot of really good tense moments as well. I thought the whole idea that Marty could talk to Doc in the back of Biff's car without Biff hearing was a little far-fetched, and that was for a solid like half an hour. Biff would be driving and Marty would pop up in the backseat. You're telling me he doesn't know that someone's in his backseat, and then he goes like, Doc! And he just yells into this walkie-talkie.
Well, and Biff's in the car when he does that.
When they're going through the tunnel? Yeah, 100%.
Okay. I guess
100%.
I guess I'm just forgetting that moment.
Yeah, 100% though. And then then Doc ends up saving Marty with the flags and the rope, and then he flies up out of the tunnel. But before that, he's on the walkie-talkie in the backseat of Biff's car, and it keeps messing with the radio. And I don't know. I mean, I get that that's part of the movie, but just stuff like that, there was quite a bit of in this movie where it was like, okay, they definitely hear that.
Yeah.
And then a lot of Marty peeking his head out while other people are talking so that the audience knew that he's still there. And then, like, totally just breathing down someone's neck, and then he would just slide back behind the scene.
Yeah, I mean, there are some things you have to do because it's a motion picture. And,
Totally.
you
They're
know,
not negatives. I just thought they were funny.
It's just like some people treat those as negatives, and it's like you have to do those things. It's not a book.
No,
you can't say, you know, he's there and not show it. It's
I think it'd be really funny to come up with some sort of game where, like, take a drink every time Marty pops up unnecessarily. I just think because he just slides out so slowly in so many scenes, and he's just like, "I'm still here," and then he slides back.
I love it. But let's go ahead and wrap this up so we can get into the third one. Adrian, what did you give Back to the Future Part 2?
I give this movie an 82. Still pretty good. It is quite a considerable drop from the other one, but I do think it's more of a B movie by grading, not by it being a B movie or the B movie. But I think it definitely just drops down from the first one in that way. I think it totally is a fully fleshed out sequel that makes sense in the trilogy and it fits really well. It's just not as much of a must watch, and it's not as much of a like cult classic staple film to me as the first one is.
Well, the first one is not a cult classic. It's just a classic.
Or I guess cult was the wrong word.
Classic.
Yeah, like if you're going through the trilogy, this one is going to be loved. It's our second favorite, but it's just a little different, and there's just some elements in there that change that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually pretty close again. I gave it an 85.
Oh wow.
I mean, not to brag, but that is the year the movie takes place in. I do.
I gave it 2015.
Oh.
The highest score ever given.
Not even mathematically possible.
Yeah.
I love this movie still. I mean, it's got its faults. It's a little bit more dense, and it's a little bit more, again, not convoluted, just dense, I guess is just be the right word, than the first one. But it still has its charms. It's still very fun, and so it gets an 85. Cool. That's going to go ahead and bring us to the third film in the franchise, which is Back to the Future Part 3. They're not very inventive with the naming here. But it was released the year after, in 1990, and was again directed by Robert Zemeckis and stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, and Mary Steenburgen. Stranded in 1955, Marty McFly learns about the death of Doc Brown in 1885 and must travel back in time to save him. With no fuel readily available, the two must figure out a way back before Doc Brown is murdered. So, it is the final film of the trilogy. What are some of your general thoughts before we dive in?
One of my initial thoughts in watching these was I was fascinated that at the end of the second movie, they had a part 3 coming next summer and then showed footage of the third movie. I have never seen that so close, but it totally makes sense because they were filmed, so they had the footage. But I thought that was so neat because basically 2 and 3 lead into each other by seconds. I mean, they are just direct continuations of each other. Mm-hmm. So it picked up with a lot of energy. The movie starts really, really energetic and aggressive, and I love it. And I thought overall, though, that the plot just fell flat for me, and I can't really pinpoint exactly what didn't work for me as much, but it just felt slower and a lot more gimmicky. Like they just kind of put a lot more time travel jokes in that didn't really feel as necessary and weren't necessarily in the other two. So it just felt a little flat for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that the without any kind of puns intended, this movie is, compared to the other two, is a one-trick pony where it stays in one timeline. I mean, it starts in 55 for a couple minutes, and then it goes to 1885, and then you get back to the current time for the movie, but it kind of stays there, and I think that's what a lot of the fans, and I guess you and I both have a problem with, is that it just stays in the past with 1885, and it's not the most engaging or the most interesting of the timelines, but I still actually really enjoyed this movie.
Oh yeah,
I
it's still a good movie.
Yeah, and it's actually a surprisingly decent Western,
Yeah.
which is surprising. There is a little weird thing, which I'll get about when we get into spoilers, which I keep thinking about, even though I shouldn't be taking it so seriously. And there are nods to Clint Eastwood in this that are just absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
Which apparently they asked him if it was okay to use his name or something in the movie, and he said, yeah, sure. And then when the movie came out, he said he was tickled by it. So it was kind of like, he loved seeing it. But let's go
Clint
ahead.
Eastwood was tickled. That is a sentence I don't think I've ever thought I would ever hear in my whole life.
Well, it's out there in the ether now. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been said.
Someone tickled Clint Eastwood, and we'll find out who.
On the next episode.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and talk spoilers for this movie. One of my personal favorite things about this was the introduction of Mary Steenburgen, who plays the professor. I can't remember her name right now. Clara, that's right. And what ends up happening with her and Doc Brown, I think, is a very nice turn for his character, and leads into one of the better moments in the movie, which this is a full-out spoiler. When Marty goes back to 1985, and Doc doesn't go with him, and then comes back to the train tracks where the DeLorean was destroyed, and Doc comes through with the locomotive time machine. I love that moment.
That's my least favorite moment in the whole movie.
Really?
Yeah. And I guess this is very controversial. So I personally felt that with the whole movie building up and Doc saying like, oh, I would love to retire in the Old West. Like, that is my dream. I think it would have been such a symbolic ending for him to actually like make that finite choice to give it all up for love. And I feel like he did do that. He gave it all up for love, and that was the big climactic ending. But then he gets it both ways. He got his love, and he gets to come back and do all that stuff. And I think I would have rather the movie like kind of ended and then opened up back in time, and then panned over and shown him like sitting happily with his family in a house in the Old West.
So I'd like to propose a counter argument.
No.
Maybe. So he gives it the going back to the present up for love, right? But technically, I feel like you can argue it that in coming back with his wife and his two kids at that point, that is his love in addition to his new wife, because the science and the pursuit of exploring the unexplored was his passion, his love, right? And you also, through the movie, find out that it is Clara's love as well, because she loves the writings of Jules Verne, which is very science fiction heavy, very that kind of, I guess, aesthetic.
20,000 Leagues, yeah.
Yeah, and the kids are literally named Jules and Verne, right? So in seeing what he could do, of course Clara's going to push him to do it again, and like that way they could explore it together. And they're not. He's not working. They're going through time for fun. They don't know where they're going to go. So he is technically retired and spending that time with his love, which is both his family and his craft. So I propose that counter argument.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the counter argument that you're saying is basically that he can have it both ways because they're both his love. Yeah. And to me, I'm actually fine with that, I guess, idea. Mm-hmm. But I feel the movie spent the entire time building up that it was going to be a choice. And it was going to be either or. And that was the whole idea. He had to say goodbye. And it was this big kind of like ultimatum of what is he going to do? Is he going to go back with Marty or is he going to stay? Even to the point where he had to say goodbye to Clara and say like, hey, I got to go. And it was this whole big deal. And so for me, it was he made the decision when he parts away with the hoverboard. And I was like, oh, like, okay, that's his choice. That was it. And I felt very resolved with it. And then to me, it kind of just threw a wrench in saying that like, oh, that problem we presented the whole movie wasn't really an issue because he has it both ways anyway. And so I guess to wrap it all up, I'm actually fine with both ways that it happened. I wish it would have happened the other way for me personally, based on how the movie set it up.
Fair enough. But let's go ahead and talk what some of your favorite moments were for this movie.
My favorite there was actually quite a few favorite moments and quite a few really not favorite moments. One of my favorites was the train pushing scene where the car jumps across, and the whole idea that it comes back or it goes back to the future at a time when the bridge is complete, so it just continues across. That was a super cool premise. A couple of things, like I just really loved how strong the whiskey was, because back then. Another thing that I really thought was just really fun was the whiskey at the local saloon. I just think, because back then it was just straight up gasoline. Like there's just no way. Like it was gasoline with alcohol, and that's it. I love how strong the movie makes it be. Like it's comedic, but it's so well done that it's so funny to me. And I really, really liked that. And I did like. I liked the Western part of it. I do think it gets very tiring pretty quickly, especially coming off of the heels of a movie that jumped around in time so much.
Yes.
I think this movie got a little comfortable, and there were a lot of gimmicks with Western stuff and all that. But I said this before the spoilers, but this movie relies a lot on time travel gimmicks and little jokes here and there. About it, like little wink winks to the audience that I just don't think were really necessary. I would have liked to have seen the movie just be a little more focused on being good instead of pleasing or doing these little nods to the audience.
Yeah, I think if they pursued something a little bit more smart, maybe a more climactic finale across different timelines. Maybe with the second movie, keep more in the past, or the future, and then the splinter past, right?
Yeah.
And, like very littler amount of time in 1955 and focused on the future and the alternate 1985. This movie, you could have done a lot more time hopping to really wrap it up, to really have that climactic feel. And I think that's how you do it today. And I think we're looking at that through the lens of today. But I still hold to it. I think that this movie could have been a little more climactic.
Yeah, I think it would have been cool for them to even like maybe go back to like Genghis Khan time. Or like keep going back at the end, like maybe something goes wrong and the train starts like going through all these different times. Just something. I do feel that the third act really just didn't add anything of substance. Like it resolved the movie, but it didn't like open anything up or get crazy or do anything unexpected. Really.
Yeah, I get that totally.
So,
it's weird because I want to say that. That, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but this movie kind of makes the ending fizzle out. And
yeah, totally.
And I don't mean that in a negative way, because it's not bad. This movie is still good. It's just, compared to the last one, it's just kind of like, all right, you could have done more. But,
I think that's what the whole movie feels like, is like you're kind of, especially after coming off the first two, every scene you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And then nothing really happens. Or at least nothing of immense gravity to the story. Whereas coming from the first two, every decision seems to have weight to it. And every scene has this do or die, don't get caught, you got to accomplish this. This movie has a lot of downtime between big moments. Whereas the other two are kind of like rapid fire. Mm-hmm. This one has solid, I would argue, acts where nothing really intense is happening.
And at the same time, I think they're really hinging on the fact that, these are people from the future in the past. So what's that like? And that's kind of the gimmick they were trying to roll with the whole movie.
Like, yeah, but they didn't have any technology. Like, they didn't bring anything with them, so it wasn't like, gotta conceal your cell phone. There was none of that stuff. They tried to do it, but they didn't bring enough technology back. You would have thought that the hoverboard would have made a much bigger deal back in the West. Yeah. Not brought into the movie until the very, very end. Mm-hmm. They just didn't capitalize on a lot of the stuff they could have done, I think.
Definitely, yeah. But there's one thing I want to talk about, which was a weird thing that I had mentioned in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm interested.
One thing, if you remember, Marty meets his ancestors.
Yes, in the very beginning.
Who his ancestor, grandfather, great-grandfather, whoever, is played by Michael J. Fox, the same actor. And Michael J. Fox's wife is played by Leah Thompson, who plays his mother. So, how does it work out that you have... Those are supposed to be the McFlys. And you have someone who looks just like his mother, who is not a McFly, just by marriage. Right?
Whoa.
So you have the McFly and Lorraine, right?
Yeah.
And then that leads down to Crispin Glover, who is the descendant of them, happening to marry a person that looks exactly like his ancestor, who is not a McFly, again, by birth.
Wow.
But by name. It's weird. I was talking about this with my coworker.
That seems like an oversight.
It's mostly for a reference and a wink to the audience, like,
yeah.
Oh, look at that. It's still weird to me, and it weirds me out.
And I think that kind of more hones the point that this movie does a lot of those like winks to the audience, and it's not necessary. We've all watched 2 films without all those, or at least without this number of winks. Like, we get it. We're here. We're on board. Show us a convoluted storyline. Show us something complicated. And this movie plays it way, way safe, and does not capitalize on a lot of the opportunities that it could have.
Yeah, definitely. So, can't really argue with that. But anything else you want to mention about this movie?
Yeah, why was there a bear in the desert?
No idea.
Yeah, that made no sense.
Just for
and
some
then also,
tension.
But the whole idea when the gas line gets ripped on the DeLorean, and then Doc says there won't be a gas station for another X amount of years. That doesn't mean gasoline doesn't exist.
Yeah, but if you don't have the technology on where to find it, you'd be spending a lot of time just digging out there. And gasoline is in petroleum, is deep in the earth.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know, but didn't they have gas-powered something back then?
I'm sure they did, but maybe not out in the West.
Yeah, maybe not like out in the middle of whatever town that was, yeah.
Yeah. So.
But it just seemed, yeah, I don't know, just didn't capitalize, missed out on a lot of opportunities, and definitely felt like the franchise kicked its feet up and said, they'll love it anyway. And and that's
I do.
Yeah, exactly. We did. I just think it could have been more. It was a movie with a lot of potential, and it ended up just falling in the good category instead of the great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those movies that was always on AMC or those movie channels, as opposed to the first 2, which maybe it was cheaper to license out than the first 2. I don't know, but
that's because the dad wasn't in it.
They
did not have to pay for his likeness.
Yeah, exactly. But let's go ahead and drop some scores real quick. I mean, we've already done our tier ranking, so let's go ahead and what did you give Back to the Future Part 3?
I gave this movie a 76.
Okay.
Another drop down. This is still a good movie. I know most of these were negatives that we talked about, but that's just because they're compared to 2 greats that came before, and 2 really good movies. So this one just does not make the jump to greatness as the other 2 did. So it gets a nice round average score for me. I definitely think if I was going to watch any of them, it would not be this one again. I'd much rather watch the first one and maybe even the second one. But this is kind of one that I've seen it, and it's kind of like, cool. I'm like, thanks, that was fun. And I get the story, and it doesn't do anything bold. And I think that it should have, and I'm mad.
All right. Well, I ended up giving it an 80.
Okay.
I think it's still fun. Like, and we're very close in our scoring on this one. I think that's actually kind of nice. We actually both line up for once.
We agreed, yeah.
But I mean, this movie is still fun. It's got awesome nods to the West and like Clint Eastwood and using the boilerplate underneath, which was teased in the second one.
Yep.
Which was very smart. Again, just a fun movie, and it has a fun climax. And again, the one thing that we haven't really talked about through all 3 of these movies is the performances. Everyone really does a good job. Michael J. Fox is iconic. Christopher Lloyd is iconic as Doc Brown. Leah Thompson does great in all of the roles she's in, whether it's the past, future, or present, or even the ancestor, which weirds me out still. Mary Steenburgen, I think, it adds a lot to the third movie, a lot of heart.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately we don't see her in the first 2, so it kind of feels tacked on a little bit, but for story reasons it makes sense. And man, the actor who plays Biff is just so much fun to watch.
Just a multi-talented guy.
Like you love to hate him.
Yeah.
It's so. But so that's gonna bring us to an end for reviewing the three of these. There is one question I want to ask you though, Adrian.
Yeah.
If they made a part 4 or a reboot of Back to the Future, what would be the storyline that you see coming? Because I was talking with my coworker about this.
Oh my gosh, what a question!
And we talked about one.
Oh my gosh, well, that's a crazy big question. I think I would like to see something happen with at least 8 timelines. So like at least 8 time or at least decades or whatever. Like I want to go way into the future, way into the past, like everywhere kind of along the middle. I want to see just an entire span of the timeline because we definitely have the technology. We saw it in Endgame. We could definitely make that happen to show the whole breadth of their lifespan. And I would also like to see a film that had a lot more stakes with affecting the first film. Okay. I think because we have these, let's just say 7 hours of this world that we've now seen, something that threatens the very origin of that, I think would add a lot of weight to the film.
Yeah. Gotcha. Something with a little more stakes, I think. Yeah.
Just definitely. More, I think we have the technology and people are now willing to sit. I bet if they came out with Back to the Future 4 and it was 3.5 hours, that would be fine. Yeah. I think everyone is now kind of more accustomed to long films, and especially for a great like this, people they want the most content they could have.
Yeah, and I think bringing it the climactic end that it deserves would probably be the best way to put it as well. The one thing that I felt like and I agree with you, I think 100%. I think that's pretty much what my coworker and I discussed. The other thing that needs to happen is it can't be Marty. It can't be his story. It should be his daughter.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
So you can introduce a female lead character, and maybe instead of Doc Brown, you make it one of his kids.
Yeah, so like Jules or Vern. Yeah,
or both of them.
Yeah.
Or maybe there was a third child that they didn't show.
That's probably what they would do is do 3. Yeah. I think having a trio instead of a duo go at it, I think would be a good evolution for the series. And the one thing I would want to see is I don't want to see the gimmicks. Like I want it to have weight. I think the story deserves to have a climactic ending that has that weight to it. I think it deserves that, and I would love to see it. If they're making it, I will definitely go see it.
There's been no word, and I think that everyone who has put forward an idea has been shot down. Just because the 3 are so well done together, I don't think you could do a 4th one. Yeah. This is all just conjecture and kind of, fun talking points. But
sure,
I think it'd be fun. I mean,
yeah,
I don't think it should happen. I don't think it would happen, but it'd be fun.
Yeah.
But that's gonna bring us to an end for this episode of The Drive Back. This franchise fever for Back to the Future, which is awesome because it's one that he hasn't seen any of before. So it was a lot of fun discussing it. We want to hear what you guys thought. If you guys watch these movies, go ahead and comment down below. Send us messages on social media if you listen on Spotify or any of the other podcasting apps out there. Adrian, they can find us all over the place, right? Where can they find us?
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram. We always post when we've got new episodes, and we also post some fun stuff. Garrett's got a blog going on right now where when he feels a movie deserves a more in-depth review, he goes ahead and writes that out. We will also be doing a lot more supplementary content on YouTube right here. So if you go ahead and subscribe to this, you'll get a lot of stuff that isn't even on the podcast, and you'll get to see our beautiful faces. But Instagram, both of our handles are on the Drive Back Podcast. And you can go ahead and find our personal accounts as well, because we just would love to talk to you.
Exactly. So with that said and done, that is going to bring us to an end. Adrian, there's something we always say, right? I feel like...
There is.
Yeah.
And in this...
Do I have to go back in time to an older episode to try and find out what we said?
You might, but my main statement is that the third movie should have been called Back from the Future, because that would have been way better. But I would love it if whoever's listening to this, you sweet, sweet soul, if you could go watch any film and tell us about it. There's so many out there, so many coming out, so many old ones. I'm still discovering new movies all the time. Garrett is as well. There's just so much out there, and you never know what you're going to like until you at least try something from the genre. So go ahead and watch any movie.
Absolutely. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And stay tuned for this week. This episode will be coming out the following Monday. So in just a few days here. Be on the lookout for our upcoming review for Mortal Kombat, which is going to be releasing actually the week that this comes out. So look forward to that. We'll put a video review here on the channel. If you're not on YouTube with us, make sure you subscribe so you can see our thoughts on that. And look forward to that. And other than that, I think we will see you guys next time on The Drive Back.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Drive Back. Make sure to be on the lookout for new episodes every Monday, and make sure to follow us on social media.